For AMP, the Association for Materials Protection and Performance, protecting our nation's infrastructure is critical to national security. We're empowering the coatings and corrosion industry to safeguard global defense through advanced standards, workforce development, and unmatched expertise. Learn more at amp.org, ampp.org. Welcome in to another new podcast from Coatings Pro Magazine. I'm your host, Ben Dubose, and I'm the news editor with the AMP Publications team. Today, we're chatting with Matt Flory, Global Business Director at paints and coatings manufacturer Sherwin-Williams. Matt has a very unique story in this industry as a Navy veteran that's now leading the military coatings segment within Sherwin's industrial business. And now with Veterans Day on the horizon in just a few short weeks, I think it's a good time to potentially tell that story and perhaps talk a little bit about the role that veterans can play within the coatings industry, and especially when it comes to addressing some of the workforce development challenges that we all know are out there. To that point, I do know from some of our offline conversations that Matt has quite a few other veterans as part of his current team at Sherwin, and they're doing great work when it comes to that military coatings business and sort of bridging the knowledge gap, if you will, between the end users of those coatings and the technical knowledge that comes from the manufacturer side of things. After all, there's definitely a lot of unique technical properties that are needed when we're talking about coatings for military use, and so Matt can definitely speak to that side of the business as well. Matt, thanks so much for taking the time. Why don't you start by telling our listeners a bit more about your career background and, generally speaking, the journey that's taken you to where you are today?
Sure, Ben, and I appreciate taking the time to talk to me today. So as you said, I'm Matt Flory, Global Business Director with Sherwin-Williams, overseeing the military coatings that Sherwin-Williams provides to the industry. My background, I've been in paint and coatings pretty much ever since my military career. You know, during that transition from the military to the workforce, I wouldn't say it was a well-planned transition, but I was able to, and through a local connection that they knew, they had a job opportunity, an opening at a basically a powder coat shop, and asked me to be a part, and then if I would lead the second shift at that particular company. So that's kind of how I got started on the commercial side of the coatings business. And as my career progressed, it was a career path that worked out very well for me. I had some opportunity with some larger companies, to build my experience and expertise in the industry, and ended up working for a large defense contractor. And then when Sherwin-Williams put together a military-focused team, asked me to be a part of it, and that's how I ended up with Sherwin-Williams, and it's been very successful since then.
I know one of the things you hear a lot about with veterans that are transitioning to a post-military career is trying to find purpose in what they do in that post-military environment. What was it to you about the coatings industry that really resonated? Obviously, I know your opportunity with Sherwin-Williams involves military coatings, so there's a direct tie there. But more broadly speaking, just talking about the coatings industry, the role of protecting assets, why was that so impactful and fulfilling to you to where you wanted it to become, the focal point of your business life after the military?
Sure. For whatever reason, it's just something that just clicked for me. The process of coatings and everything that goes into it with pre-treatments, the coating process itself. I tend to be a more detailed oriented person, and with paint and coatings, it's like I said, it just seemed like a natural fit, and I grasped it, understood it, and was able to kind of build a career off of that. When you talk about purpose, especially as you move into a company like Sherwin-Williams that focuses in so many different areas or industries, when it comes to working with the military, for me that was just a perfect fit. Again, it's a coating, but you're not just selling paint. There's something very, critical that goes into these coatings for the warfighter, for our military, whether it's the, corrosion protection it provides, for the durability of the lifetime of that, product or vehicle, or just, the IR signatures and certain, requirements to go into the coatings. But like I said, it's more than just a typical coating or a color. It's very functional, and it serves a purpose within the industry that is very unique.
I mentioned this off the top, but your team at Sherwin-Williams and that military coatings segment, you are far from the only veteran that's involved in that process. How important is that to you, having other veterans that you're working with? And what are some of the ways that it's made you all better and more efficient as a unit?
Yeah, Ben, I would say first, let me say just it was not planned. We didn't purposely build a team of veterans. It just kind of ended up that way. And having your offline conversations before, it's one of the things that you're always looking at within any industry is what's the differentiator that my team or my company has over our competition. And it was one of those points where we're working on a strategy plan and looking at different things. I'm looking at our competitors and like, what does make us so different? Obviously we have very different, ways that we service our customers. But when I look specifically at my team, it's, it was just kind of, an aha moment. Then like, well, hey, I mean, this whole team is veterans. We have, different backgrounds and different branches of service. But it's such a good group to work with. And it just was a natural transition, I think, for all of us involved. And it's something that, I can speak for the team that we all feel very passionate about what we're doing and the segment that we work in.
So I think the presence of you and a team that has a number of veterans on it has certainly played a role in Sherwin becoming one of the primary coating suppliers for the U.S. military. How did that come to be? And what was and is building that type of relationship like to where U.S. military end users trust you all to develop what they need?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different relationships that we have within this industry. We work closely with the Army Research Lab on coding development, requirements that they're making and the specifications as new threats arrive on the horizon or things that they need to be working towards for future threats. We've also had a very strong standing relationship with a lot of the large OEMs within the military market. So as they develop and grow their product lines and are awarded different contracts, we always want to team up with our customers, not just as selling paint to our customers or providing them what they need, but truly being a partner and being very transparent in what we're working on, making sure that we're meeting their requirements and criteria. And if there's anything we can do to improve the process, again, we want to be a true partner, not just hand over a gallon of paint to anybody that needs it. We want to be a part of that organization and really help, bring the best out of them.
All right, let's talk about the technical side of this, because coatings for military use have a lot of distinct technical properties that are needed for those coatings to perform on those assets in those challenging environments. What's different, generally speaking, about coatings that are developed? You mentioned your manufacturing partnership when you're working on the very front end of the process to develop these coatings. What types of technical properties are you looking for? And does your past experience with the military help you in any way when it comes to understanding that?
Yeah, Ben, I think that's an excellent question because, I mean, the coatings that we work with, they're functional coatings, right? I mean, people think about military coatings and maybe camouflage and, tans and greens and so forth. That is just one aspect of it. There is the visual camouflage, but, the top coats that we use in this segment are what we call CARC, CARC, which is chemically agent resistant coatings. They prevent, coatings, say a vehicle was, attacked by a biological or some other kind of, anti-microbial, weapon or system. The coatings can hold up to that type of biological attack and doesn't allow the agent to actually enter the coating system. But then secondarily, it holds up to the very harsh process of decontamination. That's one of the big functional aspects of it. There's also an IR aspect of it. So if you were to, you'll be looking at a field of vehicles, and if the coatings did not have the IR signature, they stand right out, right? But with the correct IR signature, it just blends in with the background. And I got some good visuals, that kind of represent that. But those are the main points of the coating itself and what it needs to perform. Personally for me, I was in the Navy. The coatings that we use in the Navy are definitely more. They're also very functional coatings, but they don't have the same criteria, as a chemical agent resistance or IR signature, but also understanding, what the need is for the military and what their end use is. A lot of corrosion resistance, extending the life, cycle of a vehicle or a ship or whatever that may be, and just making sure that we're hitting those requirements.
Yeah, and we can talk after the recording finishes, but if you wouldn't mind sharing those visuals, we can potentially link to those in the summary of this podcast so that our listeners can check out more information if they want. Speaking at the product level, what are some of the recent innovations that have come about? You spoke to the technical properties, the IR, and what you're trying to develop. In terms of the actual end products that are out on the marketplace, what are some of the things that are popular right now based on, the development processes that you've put in place?
Yeah, so typically, Ben, when we look for the specifications, we work closely with the Army Research Lab. They own those specifications.
Mm-hmm.
And what's again, maybe it's nerdy to say or geeky, but being part of this industry, we've had so many significant changes in the specifications over the past couple of years. Probably more so in the past 2 or 3 years than we've had in the past 30. Again, there's new threats involved out there that the coatings have to hold up to. There's different requirements that come across with that. One of the things that we actively do by working with our partners in the industry is the government will put out basically a statement of need saying that, hey, we need to work on the next generation of CARC or military top coats. We want to meet certain requirements, but it's requirements that we don't currently meet today. So they'll put out a statement of need. One of the things that Sherwin-Williams has been heavily involved in is partnering with the government and being awarded some of the contracts to develop, the next generation of CARC top coat. We're actively in the middle of an award on that project. The Army Research Lab is a partner and collaborator with that particular program, and we have a history of doing that. CARC powder, it's one of the things we didn't mention, but our product portfolio is water-based, it's solvent-based, it's powder, it's e-coat. But we were, granted funding to develop, the CARC powder, for the U.S. military. And again, the Army Research Lab was our partner and collaborator in that. That was hugely successful, gave the government and the Army what they needed, and helped Sherwin-Williams provide an avenue to get there.
As a quick follow-up to that, from a Sherwin-Williams perspective, I think the resources that you all have is sort of unique in that you have this very niche partnership with the Army and with military users so you can develop things specifically for their needs. But obviously there's a much larger Sherwin-Williams coatings business when we talk about industrial clients, commercial clients, coatings developed for a vast, wide range of end uses. When it comes to all that in-house knowledge, how useful is it to you that there are other departments within Sherwin-Williams that you can collaborate with, you can talk to, you can even develop, I'm sure, like offshoots of a certain technology that are perhaps reconfigured for military use or vice versa? How useful is it to have the broad capabilities of a larger organization like Sherwin-Williams to where in-house you have a lot of people that I'm sure you can collaborate with?
Yeah, Ben, as you mentioned, Sherwin-Williams is a very large company, right? We work in multiple different segments across different industries. And yes, it has been critically important to look at other segments, whether it be, transportation, heavy equipment, wind energy, building products. There's certain aspects of all those that as we're looking to improve upon a system that we have other resources to go to where, okay, we can take this platform, modify it more to a military grade or, type system. And that is really driving, our growth. It's also driving our technological expertise moving forward. Because again, we have deep resources in those other areas of business, and we're able to take things that are working there and propose it to the government, or take things and that have specific physical characteristics that we think could also be beneficial in the military. So that is a huge differentiator, as I mentioned before. But it's a resource that we have internally that you just have to find the right people to go to and get the information from. But typically, it's there. You just need to go find it.
Hey, coatings and corrosion pros, don't miss the AMP Eastern Conference happening October 14th through 16th in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Dive into cutting-edge sessions on corrosion, pipeline coatings, and industrial coatings, and explore our packed exhibit hall. Plus, enjoy unbeatable networking, including our Tuesday night social event at the Bob, all included with your registration. Visit ampp.org/events/Eastern-conference to check out the full technical program and secure your spot today.
All right, we're winding down our conversation now with Matt Flory, Global Business Director at Sherwin-Williams. We spent the last few minutes talking about the technical properties of some of the coatings that Sherwin is developing for military use. Earlier in the conversation, we touched briefly on the role that Matt and his team, which has a number of veterans, including Matt himself, has within Sherwin and how that boosts the appeal of that unit to, I think, military end users, because there is a lot of experience that they can draw upon. I think looking more broadly, both within Sherwin and beyond, I think veterans are something of an untapped market when it comes to our workforce. And so when we talk about the coatings industry moving forward, we're all aware that there are some challenges that are supposed to be on the horizon when it comes to workforce development and getting the workers that are needed. I shouldn't say on the horizon, because I know a lot of companies are feeling that challenge as we speak. It's something that you've already read about happening in the 2020s. And so potentially Matt's story within Sherwin-Williams and that of his team, that's something that potentially could be replicated at other companies within the coatings industry and perhaps fill some of those jobs that quite possibly need to be filled now and are certainly likely to need to be filled in the coming years. So looking more broadly at your story within the confines of workforce development, what are the ways in which looking to veterans can potentially help overcome the labor challenges? And what are the types of skills, the advantages, the critical knowledge that veterans such as yourself and your team can bring to the table?
Yeah, Ben, I think there could be a lot to unpack there, right?
Right.
I mean, veteran resources and looking to veterans when you're looking for a qualified individual or to fill roles within your organization, there's so much that can be said about it. Obviously because of the experience that we have had through our own training within the military and the organization that we're a part of, there's a lot of things that just come out naturally. Mm-hmm. Typically, veterans or the employees I work with are disciplined, they're organized, they understand projects that are time bound and they need to be performed and completed by a certain amount of time. Also, very much individual workers. They not that they don't need oversight, but when you give someone a task, it pretty much gets done. There's not chasing people around looking for assignments or whatever. It's a unique background that veterans provide that some people just don't have that exposure. I can say for myself, I mean, being an 18-year-old farm kid from Ohio and going into boot camp, and I've got people from all over the country, all different diversity and ethnic backgrounds, everything else, and you come together, and there is no room or opportunity for anyone not to agree. I mean, you're on the same team, you live with each other, you work with each other, you've got each other's backs, and that can be a little bit of a culture shock for any of us. Whether, like I say, you're 8-year-old farm kid from Ohio or kid from the south side of Chicago, you go in, equity and equality is pretty much just understood from the beginning. You're not the kid from Ohio or the kid from South Chicago. You're in the Navy, you're a soldier, you're a veteran, or whatever it may be. And that's and when we look at our organizations today and how we want people to come together and work with each other. I mean, veterans have the experience that a lot of people just don't have. When I came out of boot camp, I got stationed in Japan. And again, that's a little bit of a culture shock, but you learn to adjust and you're in a very unique situation there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's from the perspective of what a veteran can potentially bring to a coatings company in addressing their workforce development challenges and potentially filling some of those roles that we know are going to need to be filled. Let's also look at it from the other side of the equation, which is coatings companies appealing to veterans, because obviously when people such as yourself are leaving the military, it's not like most of them exit and say, I for sure want to work in coatings. Many of them do, but it's something that just sort of happens for one reason or another, and then they're drawn to the industry for some of the reasons that you spoke about earlier. So when we're talking about veterans coming out of their military service and looking for a post-military career, what are some of the things that companies in the coatings industry can do to position themselves to potentially be attractive to veterans and thus fill some of those roles?
Yeah, I think it's really about providing opportunity, for the employees. One of the things that's great with Sherwin-Williams, it's such a large and diverse company. Whether you want to look at marketing, sales, operations, logistics, technical, there's just a ton of opportunities within a company, like Sherwin-Williams. The other thing that we do, and I think we do very well, is employee resource groups. It's a great way for veterans to help connect and feel connected at work. Sherwin-Williams has something like 300 different chapters for employee resource groups, but one of those includes military for active and retired veterans. So again, there's a ton of opportunity within this company. An example of that is my oldest daughter. As she was leaving college and looking to internship, she reached out and she's like, "Hey, I found this internship for Sherwin-Williams. What do you think?" I'm like, "Give it a try. See what you think if you like it." So she did that, and after she graduated, became a management trainee, and it was worked her way up, and now is a manager of a local paint store. And again, if I didn't believe in the company and believe in the standards that we set as an organization, I sure wouldn't recommend my oldest daughter join the company. But along with that, even her boyfriend, has watched her go through the management training program. He's like, "Hey, I wouldn't mind doing something like that." And he happens to also be a veteran, and he went down that path, and now he's running a local paint store. So again, it's the company is something I strongly believe in, the way they support us as employees, whether you're a veteran or not. It's just a great company, great resources, for our employees, and just an unlimited amount of potential for whatever career path you want to pursue.
Excellent insight from Matt Flory, Global Business Director with Sherwin-Williams. Matt, before we let you go, for anyone that wants to learn more about you, Sherwin-Williams, the military coatings business, the technologies, what's the best resource or resources available that they can do some digging if they're inspired by this conversation and want to learn more or get in touch?
Sure. If there's any details anybody would like to follow up on, I obviously can be found on LinkedIn. My email address is matt.s.flory@sherwin.com. Feel free to reach out. There's also, we have a website out there, dedicated to military and our product line and what we have to offer. I would say check that out. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to help any way I can.
Yep, I'm looking at it now. If you go to the industrial homepage for Sherwin-Williams, they've got a special military coatings page that has all the information that you could possibly want. Can tell that you all have done a great job keeping those resources updated and fresh for your audience. All right, that will do it for today. And as far as looking at Matt, I'll confirm his spelling, Flory, if you want to search Matt Flory on LinkedIn and perhaps get in touch as Matt just described. Anyway, that's where we'll bring this episode to a close. And if you want more resources from us at Coatings Pro, then you can just check out our website at coatingspromag.com and also amp.org, ampp.org. That's the website for the Association for Materials Protection and Performance if you want to learn more about our resources and the things we have happening at an association level for the coatings industry. Also, as far as the podcast, just search for the Coatings Pro interview series wherever it is that you prefer to listen, and you can find this episode and all others. You've got a great backlog of episodes if you want to see content that's tailored specifically for the coatings audience. Anyway, until next time, this is where we'll break. For Matt Flory, I'm Ben Dubose. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new Coatings Pro podcast.